I've been married for almost 7 years, and on the surface, everything seemed perfect. My husband, Tom, and I had built a life together on a small farm. We shared everything: our home, our dreams, and even the love for our animals. But deep down, I felt something was missing. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just a phase, but it was becoming harder to live with each passing day. Tom and I had been through a lot together, ups and downs, joys and struggles. But lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had grown apart. The affectionate gestures that once came naturally had become rare, replaced by routine and silence. It wasn't that Tom was a bad husband, he wasn't. He was kind, thoughtful, hardworking. He took care of me and our farm. But there was no spark anymore. No warmth in his touch. No playful banter. We went through the motions of our days side by side, but it felt like we were miles apart emotionally.
I didn't know how to talk to him about it.
Every time I tried, it felt like I was just complaining. He was always busy, either working on the farm or wrapped up in something else. His attention was elsewhere, and I couldn't get through to him. I began to wonder if this was how the rest of my life would play out, this quiet, unspoken distance. It made me feel so alone. Then there was the horse, Buster. He wasn't just an animal to me. I can't explain it exactly, but there was something special about him. I started spending more time with him, brushing his coat, walking him through the fields. He listened when I talked, even though he couldn't answer. He was there, present, when I needed someone to be. I know it sounds strange, but I began to rely on him for comfort in a way I didn't realize at first. Buster's presence was calming, soothing. He didn't judge me, didn't ask questions, and certainly didn't make me feel inadequate. With him, I could let down my guard. I didn't have to pretend to be happy or to be okay. I wasn't used to feeling misunderstood. The more time I spent with him, the more I began to believe he understood me in a way that Tom just couldn't anymore. It wasn't about love, not at first. It was more about the emotional connection that was absent from my relationship with my husband. The loneliness I felt started to disappear when I was around Buster. I didn't even have to try. There was no distance, no unspoken tension. Just me, him, and the quiet of the farm. It was what I needed, what I craved. As the months went on, my time with Buster became more frequent. I began spending hours with him, talking, just being. I'd leave the house early in the morning, before Tom even woke up, and head out to the barn. I felt at peace there. More and more, I found myself thinking about Buster throughout the day, wondering when I could see him next. I began to crave the connection that Buster offered. It was innocent at first. Just the simple act of being near him, of sharing a quiet moment. But then, slowly, it turned into something more. There was an intensity in our connection that I couldn't deny. Something that I had never felt before. I hadn't even realized how badly I needed it until it was already happening. I never intended for it to go this far. I never imagined that I would feel so strongly about something like this. But it crept in, gradually, until it became an undeniable part of my life. Something I couldn't let go of. Every time I was near him, I felt this pull, a longing that I had never felt before, and the distance between Tom and me grew ever wider. I started justifying it in my mind. What harm could it do? After all, Tom didn't seem to care much about me anymore. We didn't talk like we used to. We didn't laugh, or hold hands, or kiss with the same passion. I wasn't doing anything wrong, or at least, that's what I told myself. I needed this connection, this emotional fulfillment, and Buster was there to provide it in a way I couldn't get from anyone else. It felt like I had finally found something that made me feel whole. And I didn't realize just how far I'd gone until it was already too late. I was trapped in my own emotions, tangled in a web of confusion, loneliness, and need. I couldn't look away from the comfort Buster gave me, even if I knew, deep down, it was something I shouldn't be seeking. But I was desperate. Desperate for the attention and affection I no longer felt from my husband. Desperate for the intimacy I craved but couldn't find. I had crossed a line I never intended to cross, and the worst part was that I didn't even know how to stop. It had become a part of my routine, my way of coping with the void in my heart. I knew something had to change. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to see a way out. All I wanted was to feel seen again.
To feel valued. To feel loved.
But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of what truly mattered, and I didn't know how to find my way back. The guilt started to creep in almost immediately, but I pushed it down, convincing myself that I deserved this. I told myself that I wasn't hurting anyone, that it was harmless. After all, Tom had stopped paying attention to me a long time ago. His focus was always on the farm, on his work, on anything but us. And I had been alone for so long, dealing with the emptiness inside me. Buster, in his own way, filled that void. It was innocent at first. I never intended for things to go as far as they did. But the emotional connection I had with him quickly grew into something deeper, more intense. I found myself craving his presence more and more. Each day, the pull became stronger.
He was always there when I needed him.
He listened to my fears and frustrations, offering no judgment, just comfort. I could sense my boundaries blurring. I had long ago stopped seeing this as just a bond between a woman and her animal. What started as a harmless form of companionship morphed into something far more complex. There was a kind of intimacy between us that I couldn't ignore. I felt drawn to him in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The truth is, I didn't just need emotional support anymore. I craved something more. It wasn't just the comfort Buster gave me. It was the closeness, the physicality of it all. But I refused to admit it to myself. Instead, I tried to justify my feelings, telling myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that it was my way of coping with the distance between Tom and me. One day it happened. I don't know what came over me, but I didn't stop it. The moment felt inevitable, as though I had been building up to it without realizing. The way Buster looked at me, the way I felt when I was near him, it all came to a head in that one instance. I had crossed a line, but in the fog of my need for connection, I couldn't bring myself to care. The guilt didn't hit me until after. In that moment, I was consumed by a mixture of emotions, relief, shame, and a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in so long. For a few fleeting moments, it felt as though I had found the love I'd been missing. But the aftermath was a different story. As soon as it was over, the weight of what I had done crashed down on me. My heart raced with anxiety, and my mind spiraled. How could I have let this happen? What had I just done? I felt sick with shame, but at the same time, there was a part of me that didn't regret it. In my mind, I justified it as an escape from a marriage that had long since grown cold. A part of me felt like I deserved this, that I had been deprived of affection and attention for far too long. It was only a matter of time before Tom started to notice. He wasn't stupid, and I could see the change in him, too. He wasn't just distant anymore. He was asking questions. Questions I couldn't answer. I wasn't sure if he suspected something, but the tension between us was palpable. It was as if we were both walking around a minefield, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The first time he confronted me, I felt my heart stop. It wasn't a dramatic scene. It wasn't a shouting match. It was quiet, careful, as if he was testing the waters. He asked me if everything was okay, and I said yes. But the way he looked at me, so unsure, so distant, told me that he knew something was wrong. I should have been honest. I should have told him, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to admit what I had done, what I had become. A few days later, he caught me. I was in the barn, spending time with Buster, just like I had been doing every day for the past few months. It wasn't that I was trying to hide it, but I wasn't exactly forthcoming either. I didn't think he'd ever find out. But there he was, standing in the doorway, staring at me. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were full of confusion and hurt. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He knew. He knew everything. I froze. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't explain it away. All the justifications I had told myself about why this was happening, why it was okay, none of that mattered now. All the excuses I had made seemed hollow, meaningless, as soon as I saw the look in his eyes.
I didn't even know what to say.
The silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to speak, to explain, but the words didn't come. Finally, Tom broke the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard in years. "What's going on?" he asked, and I could hear the underlying pain in his tone. "With you and him with Buster. I don't understand." I had to make a decision in that moment. I could lie, keep pretending that everything was fine, that I was just being silly, that it was nothing. Or I could face the truth. But I couldn't lie. Not anymore. "I don't know," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I don't know what's happening, Tom. But I'm sorry." He stared at me for a long time, his face unreadable, but his eyes betrayed him. The hurt was there, deep and raw. Sorry for what? For cheating on me? Or for wasting our whole marriage? His words cut through me like a knife.
I didn't know what to say.
What could I say? I had crossed a line, and now it was all falling apart. I could see it in his eyes. He was devastated. He looked at me, then at Buster, and the sadness on his face was overwhelming. "I thought we were happy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought we had something real. But this is something else." I couldn't respond. I wanted to, but I didn't have the words. The guilt was suffocating. All I wanted to do was take it all back, but I knew it was too late. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies could fix what I had broken. Tom's face hardened, and I could see the resolve in his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice shaky now. "I don't know how to forgive you for this." I felt my stomach drop.
I knew he was right.
I didn't expect him to forgive me, not right away at least. But hearing it from him, hearing the finality in his voice, made it all the more real. There was no going back now. We couldn't erase what had happened, and I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to what we once were. The silence between us was deafening. I wanted to explain, to tell him how empty I had felt, how disconnected we had become. I never meant for things to go this far. But there was no point in explaining now. The betrayal was clear. I had hurt him, and there was no easy way to undo that damage. Tom stood there for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on me. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the barn. I stood there, frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. My marriage, my life, it was all falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the days that followed, things were strained between us. Tom didn't say much. He was distant, cold, and I could feel the wall between us growing higher with every passing minute. The guilt gnawed at me constantly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already lost him. Even when we spoke, it felt like we were strangers. He was still here, but he wasn't really with me. He was physically present, but emotionally, he was already gone. I could see it in his eyes. I wanted to apologize, to tell him how sorry I was, but the words didn't seem enough. How could I possibly make up for what I had done? How could I explain that I hadn't meant for things to get this far, that I had been looking for something, anything, to fill the void that had been growing between us?
It didn't matter now.
It didn't matter because I had broken his trust, and trust, once shattered, was almost impossible to rebuild. I tried to make it right, but deep down I knew it was too late. Tom was hurt, angry, and confused. And no matter how many times I said I was sorry, I wasn't sure if he would ever forgive me. Tom didn't leave. He didn't pack up his things or demand a divorce, which only made things harder. The silence between us grew more oppressive with each passing day. It felt like we were living in a vacuum. Two people who had once shared everything but were now drifting apart, unable to bridge the gap. Every glance, every touch felt like it carried the weight of what had happened, and I could see how much it hurt him. The truth was I was hurting too, but my guilt didn't change anything. Tom became more withdrawn, and I, too, found myself retreating into myself. I spent even more time with Buster, as though trying to erase the growing distance between Tom and me by clinging to the one thing that made me feel understood. But every time I was around Buster, the reality of what I had done weighed heavily on me. It was no longer a comfort. It was a reminder of the mess I had created. It wasn't just the betrayal that lingered. It was the realization that I had lost everything I had ever valued. The marriage, the trust, the connection. All of it seemed like distant memories. One evening, as I sat in the barn, absent-mindedly brushing Buster's coat, I heard Tom's footsteps approaching. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I couldn't face him. He came closer and stood beside